and welcome to Café CLIL number 22, I believe. We can improvise a title, but I would say that it's part of this mini series of having specific subject experts on about CLIL. So we probably call it Young Learners, CLIL and Art, because we're going to look at art education today with Julia Mena Dobson. Hello, Julia.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good, good, good.
Julia is normally a resident down in the south of Spain in Sevilla, but she's actually at the moment in the UK. In fact, she seems to be everywhere at the moment. She's been in Slovakia training. She's been doing all sorts of stuff. She's very in demand, which is great. That's why we've asked her on. And just tell us where you are at the moment, Julia.
In Chichester, I'm working for Chichester University on some CLIL courses for teachers in Madrid.
Right.
So
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
here we
So
are.
teachers in Madrid, gone to
Yes,
Chichester. You've gone from Seville to Chichester. Well, whatever. Yeah. It's probably hotter in Chichester than Seville now, no?
possibly, yes. Got a big
Yeah.
heat wave.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, we thought we'd continue this mini series, and as I said about art education, and also I think also Keith and I felt that we haven't talked that much about very young learners. Well, I mean Keith does spontaneously talk about it because of his school and because he has young learners there, but it's not my area of expertise, and I think particularly to get your perspective on it as well, plus the art thing would be kind of interesting. Just tell us how you kind of came through this because your mum's quite well known in EFL circles, Jen Dobson, no? But you've gone over to CLIL. I mean, she's not disowned you yet, Julia, has she? I think.
No, no, she's actually learning quite a lot. She's starting to get into CLIL. Before it was, no, 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 she wouldn't go anywhere near it. But
Right, so the daughter's teaching the mum now. That's cool. That's great. Yeah, yeah. But I mean, you came through a sort of art route, like Patrick, who we talked to in maths, he came through a maths route. The history teacher came through history, and then got into CLIL and
yeah.
language teaching. I mean, what sort of, just tell us a bit about that.
Well, I studied fine arts at university, and then in Spain, to be a teacher, you have to do oposiciones, and it's a very long process to work in a state school. And because mum is an ELT teacher and has been for years, I thought, well, why not do a CELTA and start working right away?
Yeah.
So I began working with very young learners, well, the typical ELT kind of general. You do a bit of everything, and I fell in love with the little ones. Um,
Yeah.
and because of my background in fine arts, I was very interested in including as much arts and crafts things as we could in the classes.
Yeah.
And that slowly introduced me into CLIL. Then I started writing as well for OUP. I wrote some
Yeah.
6 primary CLIL books, and now we're working on another series that's recently come out. Um,
I was going to mention that actually
oh,
also.
sorry.
You are now not just teacher and a trainer, but you're also an author, quite prolific author actually, for young learners in art education in CLIL, which is really important because again, it's not really been an area that's been, developed. Yeah, you did this series, what was it, CLIL World, no? That was sort of post
COVID,
COVID.
yeah.
Yeah. And and then you've got this series Arts and Crafts out now, which kind of covers what, like grade 1 to grade 6, sort of
Yeah.
across the primary areas. Yeah, with OUP. I mean that's really cool. But I mean, just tell us actually because we do share this author thing. Um, you know, uh, publishers. We've quoted OUP. Publishers do have their own parameters and ideas. But I mean, how free are you to express yourself, and is that really what you wanted to do in these books as well? Because I mean, obviously you're aware that there's this audience also, but I mean, do you feel that you sort of express your pedagogic beliefs through these books?
To be honest, I was very, very lucky um, because it was a completely new series and they just let me come up with what I wanted to do. Let me really focus on for me, the most important thing was keeping it authentic and making sure that there was a lot of original artwork, because a lot of these art and crafts books have illustrations that have been commissioned. And I think it's a pity because we lose that kind of the beauty of history of art, which is fundamental, you know, that kind of interdisciplinary approach as well to CLIL.
Yeah, yeah.
So being allowed to use those original artworks, because that's a lot of money at the end of the day for the publisher, isn't it? I mean, if you're having to pay all these copyright permissions. So, yeah.
Do you feel it's a kind of mutual thing as well? I mean, I've used my materials for training, or the training has actually made me think about materials. I mean, do you do that in your training as well? Because I know you're very sort of committed about the way that you train teachers.
Yeah, you try to, don't you? The thing is, training, it depends so much on the group of teachers you have. You kind of have to somehow very, very quickly adapt to whatever they need in the moment.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
kind of the added complication.
But I mean, you're strictly, I mean, I've seen you in action. I mean, you're strictly practical, aren't you, in the way that you approach certainly the education of very young learners, because, you know, basically when you're looking at grade one, you're looking at pre-literacy kids. I mean, not just in, not, I don't mean in terms of art, but I mean in terms of, you know, their reading and their writing skills, and also, you know, their speaking skills are developed in the L1, but obviously in the L2 they're not. Uh, I mean, let me just see if this connects to you, because you know, as a writer, I've not written many art materials, but I did ages ago write some art materials for Primero de Eso in Spain. That's the first of secondary. And I know you know, but not everybody else. But it was a bit of a disaster actually, because it was about abstract art. I kind of thought that the final task, which was after about a month, would work because they will be able to create, which is one of the four pillars we'll talk about at the moment. But of course, what I found was it was very difficult for second language speakers to talk about abstract art. It's not just that, but of course, it's also difficult for first language speakers to talk about abstract art. You know,
Yeah.
so down the cognitive age level, Julia, when you get down to grade one, grade two, when you get down to these young learners, I mean, how do you kind of cope with that? You know, get into actually talk about. We'll talk about these four pillars in a minute, but obviously you do want the kids to talk, because if they don't talk, then there's no point doing art, you know, in a second language.
Yeah. I can't believe you saying that they didn't work, because that song, the Kandinsky song, I thought was excellent.
The song's cool. The song's cool. Well, no, actually, the final task worked. But what didn't work was preparing them for it, because there was like a month of working on abstract art, and it was just difficult to get the kids to actually talk about abstract art. And I'd not anticipated the complexity of the language. You know, when you're
Mm.
dealing with, you know, Kandinsky or something, you know, and how do you start talking about it? And I'd really not thought about that. If I did it again, I would think about it. But you see what I mean? That
Yeah.
was the problem.
I mean, I think in CLIL particularly, we need to be very, very aware of what they can and can't cognitively do, depending on their age. And obviously, the younger they are, the more we need to consider that. We see in a lot of VLT books, there's these amazing projects at the end of the term, and they just can't cut things up. So
Mm.
how are they ever going to do this lovely arts and crafts project?
Yeah.
So I think when it came down to writing these course books, it was very important to make sure that they could not only understand the concepts cognitively, which is sometimes quite hard when you're working with a curriculum that is written by people that are not teachers,
Right.
um, but also finding activities that are easy for them to do, or not easy, but that they can
But
do.
they can do, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Um,
That's
and
yeah.
make it practical, of course. So I try to do is find artwork that is relevant to them. So perhaps if we're doing high angle shot and low angle shot, is having, for example, pictures from the Minions. So it's something that they find interesting and they like, and then getting them to just simply do the actions with their peers, have some fun, then perhaps try and, you know, more than necessarily drawing it, because they don't actually have the ability to draw it as well as. So
Yes.
finding alternatives, cutting out from magazines, you know.
Well, yeah, that's why I did abstract art because I thought at least they'd be able to kind of produce certain things, and then which worked, But obviously, I wasn't going to ask him to draw a Rubens or something,
Yeah.
or whatever. But yeah, yeah. But I mean, well, that you let me in nicely because of this idea of artistic or art literacy. I mean, everybody talks about numeracy, as a literacy. We talk about basic literacy, basic numeracy. People talk about scientific literacy, but people don't often talk about artistic or art literacy, or whether it's, they don't realize, I don't think, that it is a fundamental pillar, let's say, of educational development, And so it's interesting that you're doing it also, and you defend its use, in a second or third language, whatever it would be, But I suppose, you could argue well, not argue, but I think that people who are a bit cynical about art for CLIL, they'll say something like, well, what's art about? Art's about painting. They're not going to talk, are they? Or they're not going to listen, but obviously that's not the case.
But there's so much about self-expression, especially with the little ones that with the younger learners. We sometimes don't really know what's happening. They don't really know how to express their feelings, how their ideas. So being able to express themselves in other media, be it
Yeah,
drawing with colours, with their own body, and having the time to reflect on that, because there's a big part of art that is reflective. And you
yeah,
kind of sit down and you're drawing in silence or with music. And you're thinking about it, no? Even if you're drawing an animal, you're thinking about the animal, the texture, the color, the body parts. And then once you've had that time, that thinking time that is fundamental in CLIL and in any subject that you're teaching, then the teacher might be able to come over and help you with that language that is personal to you.
right. Yeah,
Or you might have seen it and then have the time to think about it, reflect, and finally share and present to the class. So I think that more introspective way of expressing ourselves, and being allowed to find other ways that is not just,
yeah. No, I was just thinking in terms of classroom management, that my nightmare, is kind of with very young learners. I prefer older learners. My total nightmare is all these kids running about and just ignoring it. But what's obviously is that this thing about, I was reading these pillars of art literacy about the fact that it slows down perception, no? Tolerate ambiguity, decode complex messages, but also in very simple classroom management terms, if you've got the kids in arts and crafts sitting there making something or painting something, you've actually got them doing something. So, you've got the kids doing something, as you say, you've got a chance to kind of walk around and kind of think about how you might start to, elicit language from them, instead of it being like a language teacher when it's always, you're under pressure as a language teacher, aren't you? To always try and get this language and try and get people doing stuff when perhaps they don't want to, and they're all sitting there on their own without anything to do. Kind of arts and crafts sounds like kind of ideal to me in terms of classroom management once you get it going.
yeah. And also it's something, I mean, often in ELT we're doing, this is what we have to say, and these are the grammar chunks or the vocabulary that we're doing today, and that's it. There's no going out of that.
Right, right.
Whereas in arts and crafts example, it is very personal.
Yeah.
It's how you feel and how you want to express yourself.
Yeah, I love this. I mean, I'm looking at these four pillars, and it just looks like a blueprint for CLIL. It says creating, the ability to conceptualize, express your own ideas, responding, understanding how to look at someone else's art and decode it. So I guess, even little kids look at each other and go, well, that's interesting, or that's rubbish, or whatever. I mean, they're bound to respond, or you could get them to respond to each other's stuff. No? It's got, so creating, responding, connecting, but it means by connecting, which you'd said before about other contexts. No? So you can, if you give a class of 6-year-olds, I don't know, a Kandinsky, or if you give the 6-year-olds a Rubens, you're immediately moving into historical contexts.
Yeah.
And you might have stuff in the painting, obviously, that you can get them to focus on. I mean, I'm just saying this spontaneously,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but that's kind of obvious. And again, obviously, you know, a 21st century painting will have items in it that a 16th century painting doesn't have. And I mean, kids at any level, I suppose, can sort of talk about that. Obviously, at higher cognitive ages, they can talk about it in a more sort of,
Yeah.
yeah. But and then you've got creating, responding, connecting, and performing and presenting. That's interesting for me because I'd not really thought about that in terms of art. You know, I mean, you're creating, but kind of why are you performing and presenting? It says knowing how to share it. That's kind of weird for me. I like it though.
But it's that, isn't it? At the end, we create art to express ourselves and
Right.
to express our ideas or to criticize something. But there is very much about self-expression
Yeah.
in any art. And that's something you want to share, if not,
Right. Yeah. The
we're
very act is
human.
yeah.
Yeah.
So the very act of painting or creating something artistic is in fact a sort of sharing. No.
Well,
So
at
like
the end, we're
yeah.
animals, aren't we? And we're social animals. So we do need to share at some point any
So
idea that we have.
So, for example, in the textbook range, you've got grade 1 to grade 6. So, when you're getting up to kind of grade 5 and grade 6, upper primary, is part of your idea to get the kids to create, but also deliberately then to share orally what they're doing.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. Even the little ones that are doing little sharing activities, even if it's guessing what each person has done, or simply labeling, for example, oh, is it primary colours or is it secondary colours? You're already using that language, no? Or how does this make you feel? It makes me feel happy.
Mm,
Very simple, and obviously the higher the level, we get more critical thinking out of them. So in the higher levels, we're looking at topics like society, environmental art, land art, all of this, and how, we could, for example, use recycled materials in art to express
yeah,
discontent with, the amount of rubbish there is everywhere.
basically, yeah, yeah, yeah. Sustainability comes into. I mean, everything could come into it, really. History, sustainability, geography, history. I mean, the whole thing, isn't it? You said before, you said early on in this, now you talked about the interdisciplinary aspect of it. You know,
Hmm.
we could have done the whole session on that, really, but but it is again, it's obvious when you think about it, isn't it? But I just don't think about it that much.
At
um,
the end of it, we're all lovers of our subject, no?
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe we should just turn the screw a little bit here, Julia, because in a sense that, because you are a very young learner's enthusiast, you're very capable of, you're very capable with them, you're a very capable artist yourself and a writer, etc. But I mean, what would you say to a teacher who was a bit more, a bit more whatever, and was thinking about introducing a bit of art and crafts, let's say, between grades 1 and 3, for example, in English, what will you say to them? Be careful of these things because obviously there are challenges.
Oh, well, I think with our arts and crafts, it's always expect the unexpected, no? Um,
Nice.
you know, you need to have 20 eyes. And it is a slow process. For example, with the younger ones, I would start teaching scissor skills by tearing paper. They wouldn't go anywhere near the scissors at first.
Yeah.
So you kind of need to train them in using the materials that you're going to ask them to use and get them to understand how they work and that we don't go cutting people's hair, for example. So it is a process and you need to show them not just the language, not just the content, but also how to use these tools,
All right. Do you
which
also talk? Sorry, go on. Carry on. Sorry.
which I find particularly interesting because these tools actually help them. We're talking about literacy, all the early literacy like pre-writing skills, etc. You need to use your hands and you need to use well, yeah.
Do you ever do? I mean, do you ever do training sessions, or do teachers ask you? They say, what about the 4 skills, Julia? I mean, do you actually sort of focus on I mean, obviously reading's a problem because we're talking about visual literacy, but I mean, you could do at higher stages. Obviously, you could bring in more conventional reading activities, to support the art. I mean, do you talk about that in the training sessions? This sort of connection with the traditional 4 skills, which I hate talking about, but I'll throw it in.
No,
No, basically, all right, yeah. But no, that's fine. But I mean, why not? In the sense, do you find that too restrictive or something?
Um, Possibly because I've never got down to it. I love scaffolding. So I think we do look at the four skills with scaffolding and
Right.
how to help learners if you've got a really long listening or really long text. What techniques can you use to scaffold and make it easier?
Mm.
But I'm much more interested in the content
Yeah,
aspect.
yeah. So the language is very demonstrative. So I'm just thinking, I've got to get these 8-year-old kids to draw a certain type of thing. Obviously, I'm going to probably model it myself now, is that I guess. And then when you're modeling it, you're using a very specific type of discourse, I'd guess, I don't know, depending on what kind of picture you're modeling, I suppose. No?
Yeah, well, with young learners, I think you mainly concentrate on grammar chunks. So that's kind of what you're working with rather
Yeah,
than actual teaching the functions or teaching the grammar as
yeah.
you would normally. Um,
Yeah, I wasn't suggesting that. I was just thinking that obviously you said before that language kind of comes out quite spontaneously at times and you can't always plan for it. But I would
yeah,
imagine that, like in your books, for example, you're going to be trying to recycle certain grammatical
yeah.
functions, certain stuff that probably does come up. It's not just this and that and colours. It's probably a lot more than that, no?
Well, again, you'd have in my course books particularly, and in the ones from that series because there's also a lot of the science books has some amazing examples of scaffolding. So there's a lot of scaffolding throughout the book. So for each session, you have the language that the learners will need,
Right.
be it in sentence frames, sentence starters, be it a speaking frame, whatever you're encouraging them to do. You've also got the keywords are highlighted. So there's lots of little elements to help the teachers and the learners with that language.
Okay. And in the teacher's book, you probably say, just in case they say this and that, or they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Just in case kind of stuff in the teacher's book. Yeah, that's great. Look, it's brilliant stuff, Julie. Just to maybe conclude it. Well, do you often say in training as well about, I'm interested in the interdisciplinary aspect as well. Do you say to teachers, look, you've got all this stuff in art, talk to the history teacher, talk to the maths teacher. Do you also do that?
Yeah, that's something I'm recently getting more and more into because I think the younger the learners, the easier it is to do that. So in early years, for example, I think it's very easy to try and create an interdisciplinary project where all of the different subjects are working together
Right.
on that kind of final project at the end where you get all the language and all the subjects. And I think it can be very time consuming to start off with, obviously, because you've got to speak to a lot of people, but it can save a lot of time at the end of the day if, teamwork makes the dream work now. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I think it would be wonderful if we could go towards that kind of interdisciplinary approach. It would be excellent.
Yeah,
And
I mean, art seems to me, from out as an outsider, it just seems to me a kind of interdisciplinary thing, sine qua non. Seems to me kind of obvious that, you could, that if a school's functioning well, that it would want to exploit those kind
mm.
of possibilities, no? Certainly through primary.
And also it creates that kind of homeschool link because I think parents are getting more and more, they're expecting more and more
Yeah,
outcomes from the school and they want to see more what's going on and see that their children are learning. So through arts and crafts projects, especially if you're working in interdisciplinary projects, you can take things back home and show the parents and they can share in English what they've been doing and talk about it. And it's a great way to kind of establish that relationship.
yeah.
But
Julia,
I think we've
Julia.
got a long way to go still until that happens.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I mean, and all these things happen, but don't happen, don't they? That's the thing that me and Keith always kind of say to each other. All these things that we talk about, do happen, but they should be happening actually more. Look, Julia, I won't keep you any longer because you've got to go and prepare your training sessions now. So thank you for giving up your time. Thank you so much for
Thank you
coming on
so
to
much. It's
brilliant
been an
stuff.
honour. Thank
No,
you.
brilliant stuff. No, no, for us as well. Fantastic stuff. Thank you. Brilliant.
Because I've run out of mugs, I thought I'd show my stovetop kettle to our listeners.
Yeah, beautifully artistic. Well, I brought along the, oh, let's pull it back out of focus. It's my pre-Raphaelite mug. You can't see
Oh
the,
my
oh, there
goodness.
you go. Look,
Wonderful.
quick,
Oh, there.
quick
Oh, look
flash,
at that.
quick
That's
flash of pre-Raph there. Yeah,
nice.
yeah.
Well,
Thought that was appropriate.
we've got art, CLIL, and I think there's so much here. We're going to have to come back to this. And I mean, I have to start by saying thank you very much to Julia, because it was a wonderful, down-to-earth, chalk face interview, wasn't it?
It was, and there was also, she said so many things that I just hadn't really thought about, and
Yeah.
that's the kind of interview I like, you know.
I mean,
I don't want people to tell me things I know, you know.
let me show you. This is Garfield, right? And this is part of why I set up Anglia School, because I mean, firstly, my daughter went to a kindergarten where they hardly ever did any art or craft. I couldn't believe it, and I'm having these little panic attacks. What about her neural pruning? Her pathways are going to be non-artistic because she won't be able to develop them. And I set up Anglia School specifically because I wanted our kids to art and craft every day. And they do. There's something in every single daily session where they're thinking about creative, whether it's imagery or other types of craft. And this was on a trip we made to a mountain resort. And there was a woman there with ceramics for kids to sit down and paint. And we thought, oh, Dara will like that. She got sat down and the woman said to her, hang on, Garfield doesn't look like that. but I mean, to sort of bring us back to our discussion, my daughter's just signed up for an engineering degree at university after leaving school, and it's engineering and design. So, you know, really, I think we've achieved a great result with that choice, because she's doing science, but she's going to be creating stuff, you know. And I wanted to thank Julia for
Yes.
raising that issue, because everything we do at Anglia School has, she mentioned the interdisciplinary kind of perspective, and maybe you could say something about that, because I think that it permeates also everything we do. So we do art, but we link it with science. We do art, and they do some maths as well while they're doing art. And, you know, in a way, it's a shame that, it's not really a shame, it's an appeal to the general educational world. Think more interdisciplinarily, you know, because it ties up parts of the curriculum that are not naturally, they tend to be pigeonholed and not really connected so much.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing in a lot of European curricula now. You are encouraged to, you know, think of interdisciplinary projects, interdisciplinary ways of perhaps thinking about your subject. And she did talk about that. Well, I used that pretentious phrase. Maybe art is the, you know, sine qua non of interdisciplinary, but that's not to dilute the importance of the art itself, of course. And I thought Julia
Yeah.
was also very good on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly at primary and secondary level, it's so obvious, isn't it? I just like that point also about learning about things. She mentioned the minions, and I was
Yeah.
looking back at the recording. I thought, did she mean Las Meninas by Velázquez? I didn't know. I didn't understand what she was referring to. And of course, that shows I'm getting old now. Of course, the Minions is a whole thing I do know about. I've seen them, you know. But
Yeah.
again, the way that I mean, that's not interdisciplinary, but it could be, you know, and it certainly
Yeah.
could be. And the more I looked into Minions, I did see that the Minions
Yeah.
are used by lots of teachers for interdisciplinary purposes. I mean,
Yeah.
precisely,
Yeah.
not necessarily artistic
She was
things.
talking about perspective, I think, wasn't she? She was talking about kind of where your eye level is, and creating image from different perspectives. I think that was one of the things she mentioned about the minions, is that obviously being minions, they're right down here. You know?
The higher and lower angle things about the
Yeah.
camera. Yeah, yeah. Again, things that you don't think about unless you're an artist like Julia.
I mean, I really appreciated that she's obvious. I mean, she's an artist. Her major was fine art, she said. And
Yeah.
so she's going to think about arting the curriculum. Of course she is. And that's a very healthy perspective to have, because it opens all the doors from art to science, from art to maths, or other starting point. And I have met colleagues who do have that kind of obsession from one subject viewpoint. Math the curriculum is another phrase I've come across, but then bring in all of the other disciplines from your standpoint. And I think it's very healthy.
Art of the curriculum, yes. Well, we did mention in the talk the 4 pillars. Now, one of them was connecting, and what it meant by that was connecting to other contexts. So, of course, connecting to other disciplines, but the most obvious connection being historical. So, as soon as you even show 6-year-old kids Velasquez and Kandinsky, you're looking at sociological, historical information that you obviously can't go into too deeply with 6-year-olds, but you are introducing them to that abstract idea, that you're moving kids again, that idea in education, that you're constantly moving them from the abstract to the more concrete. Again, look at that in art. That's just such an obvious way of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, the other, there's so many things, spin-offs, that we're going to have to come back to this. I mean, Keith Haring, that is kind of pop art, sort of graffiti pop art. Keith Haring's artwork it's all about movement in art, and Diana, our manager, does great workshops on motion with the kids in our school. And there's the really wonderful Barbara Tversky book, The Mind in Motion, which is all about how our thinking pre-literacy was all about gestures and all about movement, and we've only been literate for several hundred years, if you think about it, but we've been thinking in other ways for thousands of years.
That's a great point.
Her book describes that. And Ken Robinson, the Element and Out of Our Minds, he writes all about, what is being missed out by this logico-deductive propositional path that schools tend to go down.
That's right. The famous TED talk, where he talks about creativity should be that fundamental pillar of education, and it's just seen as a kind of sideline. That's what I liked about Julia's talk. You could see how that was fundamental to the way she thought and the way she set herself up. And when I said, how about the 4 skills? She went, no. But of course, that was great. I love the way she said that. But then later in the talk, she did say, obviously, that, when you get up to upper primary in those books, obviously that's thought about, and there is key language that's used, and you recycle that key language, and you are aware of that. But I just like the way she dismissed that point. She was dismissing it. What she was doing was she was dismissing it as a pillar. That's a pillar of language teaching. It's not a pillar of art teaching. And so that was a very important distinction that she drew.
That's right. I mean, you both touched on, I don't think you used the phrase visual literacy, but you did touch on visual thinking, and that's hugely important, isn't it? And Neil Mercer, we have to come back to him and his book Oracy, because trying to break through the numeracy literacy stranglehold on education, they're not important, of course they are, but there are all manner of other important ways of thinking and expression, and oracy is one of those. And visual thinking, Temple Grandin, visual thinking, the hidden gifts of people who think in pictures. This world is there for educators to explore and help their learners grow off the page, which tends to be how we're led by the publishing world with the textbooks, basically. Thank goodness there are teachers and authors like Julia who are breaking those molds.
What really bummed me out, Keith, absolutely, what really made me think was when there were certain words she used. I mean, she used the word reflective a lot, and she talked about self-expression and reflective, but it was really interesting. She used the word introspective. And when you think about, I mean, sometimes introspective is seen negatively, but she was using it in a positive sense, in an educational sense. But what really bombed me out was that when I think about language teaching, we always think about language teaching as, communicative. And so what language teachers are trained to do particularly are to have these kind of synchronous interaction things, and if those synchronous interactive things aren't happening, then they get failed, if they're being observed. They have to get kids speaking. But what Julia said was that, Well, you get kids working, and you obviously do this in the Anglican school. You get kids working on something, and they're just working on it, and you can wander around and say, "Hey, that's interesting. What are you trying to do there?" And you get this emergent language as well, where the kids say, "Well, I'm trying to do this, or I'm trying to do that," and they'll tell you because it's a personal thing. It's a personal, reflective introspection. We're always so obsessed in language teaching with this, what I say, synchronous communicative thing, but actually, that's not what art's about, is it?
The other thing I think to share from Anglia school practice is it's glorious to go into a classroom at Anglia school and there's silence.
Yes.
That's a bit counterintuitive coming from a language professional. But the truth is, during the art activities or other creative activities, the real magic is when they're concentrating and thinking and they're really into it. And and sometimes I can hear one of our teachers will break up a song, start up a song during that silence, and everybody joins in very quietly because they're concentrated, and it's almost subliminal. That song that they did 20 minutes ago is recycled during the concentration, and it is a very magical thing, but crucially important. That you and I, before we started, talked about this kind of machine gun language teaching approach where it's this, choral repetition, and the more it's repeated, the better. And of course, there's a role for that. But I love the silence because they're thinking when that happens.
Well, it's a great one. I was looking at those 4 pillars of art literacy, and one of them was about slowing down perspective. I'd not thought about that. Slowing down perspective instead of the perspective like a Cambridge exam. What can you see? Describe what you see. Well, okay, but let me do it at my own time, and let me say what I think it is. Whereas in the Cambridge exam, I'm not attacking Cambridge. Obviously, it's an exam, but you're supposed to describe what is in that picture. You're not supposed to say, well, my interpretation of that picture of that city street is actually, it's kind of a horse,
Absolutely.
But you're not supposed to have a personal perspective.
Throw in another book, because I know people like to pick up titles and things to go and explore. I read about a neuroscientist called Jill Bolt Taylor, who suffered a stroke, lost use of the left hemisphere of her brain, and took her 8 years to recover fully functionally, but she didn't want to go back into the research side of neuroscience because being without the left hemisphere of her brain made her totally aware of what the right hemisphere brought to her life, and she wanted to keep that. So now she does teach neuroscience, but she does it hands-on, and her students who follow her classes get their hands in and feel the big picture, and she talks as well a lot about this switch off the chatter that's up there in the left side of the brain. And I think, who's better placed to help learners be aware of that process than we are? And in the art classroom, they do it by default because of the slow down introspection, concentration that's going on.
Well, I said that the art literacy thing was like some kind of blueprint for CLIL, going back to CLIL, and it's absolutely true, but just other things like I'd not thought about, art, that art helps you to tolerate ambiguity. I mean, look at that as a transversal competence nowadays. It's what everybody's saying. That's what we've got to get. And Ken Robinson was saying the same thing. We've got to get kids to be able to do that because the world's really getting problematic in that sense. And so if you talk about critical thinking, tolerance of ambiguity is also critical thinking. It's a type of critical thinking. And I've not really thought about that again in art. And I mean, obviously you build that up. I mean, Julia was quite clear with what she said about the difference between the lower primary and the upper primary kind of cognitive demands that you could make on the kids. So absolutely.
Embrace your errors. I think Robinson's quote is something like, if you haven't made a mistake, you've not really learned anything.
That's absolutely true.
Something like that, isn't it? And the other thing I wanted to throw in, because that was my stopwatch going off at 10 minutes, so we'll bring it to a close because we will come back to it, won't we?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
The other thing that Julia did mention is products. And I think these are very, very important. That obviously in an art class, you're going to come out with a product, at some point, lots of them probably. And that's a very useful thing for all teachers to think about, is to have ideas for products and work backwards, because that happens naturally in art and crafts. In our summer program right now, for example, every week ends with a week-long project product that kids work towards and take home at the end of the week. And they're very useful for teachers to hone in on, create an idea for something for production, and then work backwards from that through the processes and the language and the concepts.
And you do recycling as well, Keith, through art, no, surely, because you're always very careful about the materials that you use and making the kids aware of that, no?
Yeah.
I mean, Julia did mention that as well.
Yeah.
That's another interdisciplinary aspect, isn't it? I mean,
We've probably got themes here for 5 or 6 mini-series on art.
Yeah.
So let me stop the recording.